All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for another installment of LMI Quick Thoughts. I'm here today with Ashley Shoval. She's one of LMI's human design experts. And today we're going to be having a quick chat on why humans have to be at the center of technology. So, Ashley, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. So, yeah, let's jump right in. A really basic question. What is human-centered design, and how is that different from the way that technology is typically built today?
Sure. Yeah. So, human centered design is really just a creative process for solving problems that begins, involves, and ends with the user in mind. Organizations that don't use human centered design, I've seen different things like they'll often prioritize a different perspective. For example, a high ranking leader. Or some other piece of the business. And there's always an array of customers in any given effort, but human centered design understands that people are not always predictable, consistent, or rational. And so we take that into account as part of our process. So, for example, we identify and test assumptions and make decisions based on user feedback in addition to our informed opinions.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of including the entire organization in, say, a digital transformation or a product development? One of the things that I've noticed is leaders tend to drive a lot of the decision making, and I'm wondering how you can best incorporate the end users when creating a piece of technology.
That's a great question, Adam. And so the way that I think a helpful way to look at it is that anytime you're designing something, there is what comes before. Then there's the actual human computer interaction. For example, there's the product or service that you're designing, and then there's what comes after. So and human centered design is critical in each one of those pieces. So not only I think a lot of companies are already understanding that it's crucial for designing the thing, the product or the service. But what our teams like to do is also include it as part of the change management. So we often forget that when we are asking people to adopt new technology or a new way of behavior, we're asking them to stop something else. And so it's really important to take that into consideration. And what this looks like often is um, communications and marketing campaigns, training, champions, and other supports that sound a consistent drumbeat of change. Otherwise, the risk is that your end users or your customers will feel left behind.
So when going about that change, what do you think are some of the best ways to go through the actual product development life cycle? Is it an iterative approach where you're constantly involving end users and leaders? What have you seen as sort of the best approach to building the product with human centered design in mind?
Yes, all of the above. So there's a stakeholder management piece that is also critical in addition to your end users. We've approached this in a variety of ways. We do reviews on a regular cadence to keep our stakeholders involved and get continuous feedback from them. We also, I'll share an example from a recent project where we created a customer experience panel with the expectation that we would be able to go back to them as needed for feedback. And it's just nothing more. It's not as complicated as it sounds. They were actually really really happy to be asked their opinion and stay involved, and it makes them feel like they're part of the team. And then they can take pride knowing that they were part of the co-creation process.
And in the federal space, that term customer, I feel like has a variety of different meanings depending on the agency's mission. In some cases, that may be the American people. In other cases, that customer, that end user, might be an employee of the agency, and in some cases, it's both. So when talking with leaders and talking with product designers, how do you sort of help them understand who the stakeholders are?
Right, that's a great question. Yeah, and certainly in these larger, more complicated efforts, there are lots of customers. So it sounds frighteningly impersonal to refer to them as the user. It doesn't sound very human for human-centered design, but so we differentiate between the end user and stakeholders using personas, so that we capture them all, but we prioritize them because we can't address the needs of everyone. But it's an important part of the process to decide where our focus is going to be, who has the deepest, most salient pain point, what is getting in the way of success, and how can we mitigate risk and create something that we can iterate on.
When you're going through this process, what are some of those major questions that leaders need to be asking themselves, especially as they're looking at an enterprise IT acquisition or migration, and further, are there things that maybe aren't quite as obvious for some of these IT transformations, like for example, moving to a cloud environment, and trying to build interfaces that interact with data, on premises or off premises, when building those applications in house. What are some of the considerations that leaders need to be asking themselves?
Yeah. So I would say, there are the set of questions about who is, from the user's perspective, what problem are we trying to solve? How are we trying to improve their lives? What does success look like? What gets in the way of that success? But also things like what technologies do we need to sunset? I'm thinking about security and scalability concerns. Those are always huge pieces of the puzzle that have to be addressed early on. Particularly with federal clients, security is always table stakes. And then, yeah, I mean, but always just sort of, not what doesn't work. Maybe I should start there. What doesn't work is creating a list of, hundreds of or thousands of requirements and starting from there. It's really about making sure you involve your stakeholders and your end users through every step of the process so that we're all aligned and informed and thinking through this together.
It does dovetail back with the discussion we had last week with Ashley Young on the importance of digital and business transformation as a holistic process. And I'm hearing a lot of rhyming and echoing between your comments and hers. That at the end of the day, a successful IT transformation or a successful product development really requires thinking of the humans and asking what problem are we trying to solve and how are we trying to solve it. Um, so, in talking about those humans, you mentioned branding and marketing. Something else that comes to mind is culture. How do you transition a culture to accept a human-centered designed product? And like you mentioned, what are some of the elements that organizations can do to transition away from their old products?
Right. Yeah. Culture and habits are paramount. I think we all know this as we've tried to change our own personal habits. Right. It's the most difficult thing, and the easiest path is to go back to what we've always been doing. But I think that we've seen with the pandemic and other events of the last couple of years that when we need to change, we do and we can. And that's actually a good example of of what I was talking about earlier about adoption strategies and using all of the levers that we have to communicate the change, explain the why behind the change, demonstrate that the change is successful, that it improves our lives, and that we're all in this together. It takes people. It takes people time. It takes people motivation to be able to do that. And a huge part of human-centered design is recognizing that psychology of human behavior behind everything. At the end of the day, we are designing for us. And imagine if Apple launched the iPhone with no Genius Bar, no stores where you could come and play with the technology, take classes, Apple support. Like that's there are lots of great case studies out there. We actually have a few of our own. One thing that we launched recently was Talent Ignite, which is it's a platform that will drive employee engagement and promote retention and proactive career development. And we've just recently launched this, and we've involved our users every step of the way. And so we know that when it comes time for a full rollout, we're just doing small batches now, but we know that because they were part of the design and we've walked them through it, that they will adopt the technology, and they're already showing really positive and exciting feedback that this is addressing some of their unmet needs, and they're really excited to see more features down the road.
That's great. Yeah. And it's a great way to sort of wrap up our conversation. We did get one comment from Clay Purcell. I'm going to try something new here and click the show button. But Clay says that software must be seen as a tool and enabler for humans rather than humans as operators of software. And I think that is, kind of a perfect summation of all the things that you've been talking about, Ashley. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot. As time marches on, we learn more and more, and human-centered design becomes, it becomes sometimes overcomplicated. There's service design, interaction design. There are lots of different ways to slice and dice it, but ultimately, what Clay said was a very, very succinct way to talk about it. So I love that. Thank you, Clay.
Great. Well, Ashley, really appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone who watched. We're going to be doing these on a fairly regular basis. We're still lining up the details for our next LinkedIn Live, but we are relatively sure it's going to be centered on AI and data analysis. So look for an announcement here in the next few days, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Adam.